Hi there, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how you can stretch your hip flexors, but also significant parts of the torso as well if you want to involve that. Critically though, I'm going to show you how you can do this without jeopardizing your low back, without compressing the low back, and where you can simultaneously strengthen your abdominal core at the same time. Now a lot of people when they stretch their hip flexors will go into something like a lunge, and although that does get a feeling of stretch over the front of the hips, there's very little regard paid to what's going on in the back. Now your hip flexor muscles will either attach onto your pelvis or the lumbar spine, and so if you go to a point where they're stretched and then go beyond that, they will pull the front of the pelvis down and forwards, they will lordoze the back in that combination movement, and you can get this big compressive force happening in the base of your spine. Also, you lose objectivity on what's actually getting stretched, and the abdominal muscles are largely dormant in that position. So the technique I'm going to show you is broken up into several parts, and the first one starts from this double 90-degree angle for the legs. The rear foot can be tucked under like mine, or it can be flat, whatever feels more comfortable for you. Your feet and knees are hip width apart, so you've got a reasonable base of support. And for the first part, your hands are just resting on the front knee. To begin with, float the crown of your head up to the ceiling to lengthen your torso, and then keep your head and shoulders still as you perform this first aspect of the stretch. Think about the distance between your belt line and your rib cage, and try pulling the belt line slowly and steadily slightly up towards your rib cage, almost like you're tucking your tail slightly between your legs. Now as you do that, don't allow your head and shoulders to move back, and don't fully flatten your spine either. It's just the first position where you're pulling that belt line slightly upwards, and that usually begins to feel like you're getting a stretch on the front aspect of your hip. Now some people will find that's all they need, and that's a really valuable stretch position because you're now using your abdominal core to pull up against the stretch down below, but that's facilitating a stretch of some of those hip flexors. Now moving into the second aspect of this stretch, I'm just going to turn to face camera for this bit. Exactly the same setup, head lengthened, head and shoulders still, set the pelvis, pull that belt line up to initiate the stretch, and then, with the arm on the same side as the stretched leg, reach slowly up towards the ceiling. Now the further you get up into the upper reaches of the stretch, the more noticeable the pull comes down below, and this starts to bring in some of that lateral line of the torso as well. This is where you have to think a little bit harder about maintaining that belt line up to rib cage as you go into this position. Now here there might start being a little bit of tension. You might notice it's a little bit more challenging to relax your breathing. So don't push too hard, remembering that with stretching in this type of technique, it's just a mild to moderate pull which you're hoping to feel. Moving into phase 3 of this stretch. Pelvis set, arm above, lower body set in concrete here. Don't let it move as you roll away from your stretch side, reaching directly overhead. And this is where you can rest this elbow and forearm on the thigh quite comfortably. But now you're still thinking extra hard about keeping that belt line pulled up to the rib cage and just doing this pure side bending movement. Relax your breathing. You're going to feel these wonderful pulls coming through the leg, but remember, just a mild to moderate pull. And that will be phase 3. Now for each of these phases, you probably want to hold for 15 or 30 seconds, and then if happy, you can move on to the next one. The final element is to bring in thoracic rotation. So once you're over in your position and you're really thinking about this belt line pulled up to the rib cage and pulling in the belt line as well, you could turn your chest away from the leg that you're resting on and feel that stretch move through the abdominal compartment. If that feels okay, you can do the same the other way, rolling your chest to turn to the other side. But all through this, you're keeping that integrity in the anterior wall, you're working hard on the abdominal muscles, and you're making sure that there's no movement in the lower body. Because a lot of people will swing their hips out because of a lack of control. Once you're in that final position, just come out of it slowly in a reverse aspect. The final thing, if you feel like you still need more, I'll turn sideways to this one, and this is why I've got my cushion handy, because if you're going to do this one, not only is it more of a balance challenge, but you need a little bit more cushioning underneath that knee. For this one, you're going to reach behind with the opposite hand and grab that ankle. This brings in the rectus femoris as well, the long quadricep. Now you're already on quite a stretch here, so if you do tilt up and pull that belt line up and keep that belt line pulled in, lovely stretch, and then you can add in the components from before, be it with side bending or rotation, one way or the other, but with that extra element of knee flexion, you're going to really tap into all aspects of the available stretch. So this is just a standardized passive stretch where you are using your abdominal muscles to resist the pull, to maintain integrity in the lumbar spine, and just to get you more efficiency and more effectiveness in your hip flexor stretching.